Our next guest, Gregg Pemberton, the chairman of the D.C. Police Union, joins us now. Greg, good to have you back with us, sir.
Vince, thanks for having me. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Help me sort through what you hear Trayon White say here. It sounds like, on one hand, he definitely supports having more cops in place to help bring about a peace in the city that's desperately needed. On the other hand, he is suggesting that you and the union have brought back cops who shouldn't be in those jobs. What do you make of all of that?
Well, I think you might need longer than a 3-hour show to sort through whatever that was that he was saying just now. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Let's break it down. First of all, we are short cops. I don't know where those numbers he's citing come from. They don't make a lot of sense to me. But we are short about 500 police officers right now citywide, and I'm sure that he's feeling that in Ward 8 and the citizens that are there with him are. And it really is correct that it's a war zone. I mean, it's absolute bedlam and mayhem out there when you look at the crime stats. We're at 161 homicides this year, which is a 20% increase over last year's significant uptick in crime. So he's right about that. And the problem is that he's the one that broke it. And it's through the city council's action in passing the 2022 Policing and Justice Reform Act, which is what drove 1,200 police officers out of the department and has rendered us absolutely incapable of hiring anything to replace those numbers. I don't know what his offhanded comment about people who were rehired by the police department. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But the fact of the matter is that we are short cops, and that's the main reason why his ward looks like a war zone. And the reason that we're short cops is because he passed a mountain of terrible legislation that prevents us from doing our job.
Let me play another piece of audio from Trayon White today. He says he's been saying that he thinks it might be time to bring in the National Guard to help establish a peace in the city. Here he is saying that at the press conference.
So I have spoken with the D.C. National Guard. And while I have to have more conversations with the chief of police, which I have today, and the mayor and my colleagues, we have a long way to get there. We just know that police alone is not getting it done. I saw the shooting video of Nia Courtney, who was shot on Martin Luther King Avenue and Malcolm X. Think about the irony of that. On Martin Luther King, intersecting Malcolm X, we had 5 people shot. One was a little girl. And guess what I saw in that video? The police sitting right there. There was a shooting. I won't even want to say a shooting. There were 3 shootings this summer at funerals. And one funeral, guess what I saw in the video? The police sitting right there.
Gregg Pemberton, what do you make of this? He's calling for the D.C. National Guard, now suggesting in the same breath that police aren't enough alone to get the job done and that cops stand by as violence is afflicting the city.
Yeah, it really is a scatterbrained set of comments. I mean, first of all, the National Guard, they're wonderful people. They do great work. When they are called out, they're typically called out for civil disturbance or special events like an inauguration or the 4th of July. They have been called out before in times where crime is high, but they're really used as a visual deterrent. These people, even though they have arrest powers, they don't investigate crime. They're not going to go to the scene of a shooting and try to investigate who, committed that offense. They're not detectives. And that's not the kind of solution that we need right now. What he's complaining about is that the police officers don't have the ability to get out and do their job the way they used to. And the reason that that's the case is because of the bills that he's passed since he's been sitting on the council. And the way for them to fix that, they could literally do it overnight. They could pass an emergency legislation that repeals the Policing and Justice Reform Act in 2022, submit that to the chief, and have these police officers doing work. We could get these numbers down in 30 to 60 days. But one thing that's interesting is he points out that he sees these videos of these shootings and there's a police officer right there. That's not an indictment of the police not doing their job. That's an indictment of how brazen criminals are, because they know even if that police officer gets out and arrests them, there's no consequence for that because prosecutors and judges won't hold them accountable for committing that crime even when they're convicted. And that's the other part of the problem. And until people like Trayon White and the rest of the city council realize that what they've done is they've completely destroyed criminal justice in the city, I don't think that this problem is going to get solved anytime soon.
Congress tried to solve it.
By the National Guard.
Congress tried to solve it earlier this week. They tried to repeal that Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act of 2022, which you mentioned. Joe Biden vetoed it. You think that was a mistake?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We did a lot of work lobbying the House, and we got bipartisan support in the House and in the Senate to repeal that bill. They saw the detrimental policies that existed in there. Unfortunately, when it went down the street to Pennsylvania Avenue, President Biden didn't see it the same way, and he vetoed the bill to repeal it, which meant that the bill ultimately went into effect. And the city council rejoiced that decision, and they hailed Joe Biden as a hero for doing that. And now here we are with the same group of people throwing their hands in the air saying, how could this possibly have happened? Chairman Mendelson came out earlier this week and he said, well, I need the police to come to me and tell me what it is they need. This is just an absolutely laughable statement. I mean, we have testified in every public hearing that has anything to do with policing. We've submitted written and oral testimony. We've met with them. We've met with their staffs. I've even taken them to coffee before to sit down and try to explain to them what the intended and unintended consequences of these policies are. And we've laid this out in every day that we have an opportunity. We've given them exactly the tools we need, which is for them to repeal these measures that handcuff cops. And now they want to stand up here and say, well, we don't know what it is you need. It's really preposterous, and it's just terrible flip-flop rhetoric from the city council.
Isn't DC Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, wasn't he responsible for cutting resources for cops? And now he's saying that we need to be giving the Metropolitan Police Department all the resources they need?
Yeah, this is a group of people that were very loudly supporting the defund the police movement. These are people that moved to reduce the budget of the police department, to reduce the scope of police officers, to reduce the physical size of the police department. And they fought hard to do that all through 2020 and 2021. And finally, when these bills passed in 2022 and were implemented into law and we started to see the crime going off the rails, they've since backed away from that position, and now they want to pretend like that never happened. And unfortunately, we have the receipts, and we're going to show them that it is their fault. And hopefully the voters see the same thing, because the only way to fix this is going to be to get council members elected that care about public safety and care about the police department.
How just to back things up for a moment, how desperate is the situation now when it comes to violent crime in D.C.?
This is the worst I've ever seen it in my nearly 20 years of being on this department, and even people that have been on significantly longer say the same thing. A lot of people say, well, it was worse in the 90s. I think we're starting to look a lot like the city did during those times. I mean, we're on pace, I think, mathematically to surpass 250 homicides this year. These are numbers that are really catastrophic. And I think one of the main problems that I point to regularly that no one seems to be discussing or trying to solve is that every month for the past 5 years, we have posted a negative net loss of police officers. And, there's a lot of debate about, well, how many people should be on the department? Should it be 3,500? Should it be 4,000? These arguments are completely moot because we're losing officers every month. And if you run that timeline out, at some point it's going to get to zero. And this is not something that you can change overnight. And the fact that no one's talking about it right now means that it's not going to be solved for years. And I think by the time the city council and others that are in its orbit realize, hey, this is a real problem, it's really going to be too late to turn this thing around. Go ahead.
What is the primary factor in the attrition rate, would you say?
The bill that the city council passed, which completely eliminates the due process rights of police officers. It eliminates all equitability and fairness in the disciplinary system. It changes the use of force policy so that investigators can sort of armchair or Monday morning quarterback the issues rather than using the Supreme Court guidance on use of force. Increases the Office of Police Complaints ability to investigate and discipline police officers even when they don't have the evidence, that the preponderance of the evidence to do so. It really creates an environment that it's almost impossible to be a police officer and to be able to go out and do responsible policing.
And it stacks the deck against the cops and in favor of the criminals, for sure. Because like an example that always sticks out to me is that by virtue of the law you and I are talking about, DC cops are not allowed to reflect on their own body camera footage when preparing their police report. They can't look at the camera footage that was on their body in order to compile their police report. They're expected not to look at it. And if there's any discrepancy between the two things, the film and the memory of the cop, the case, obviously gets thrown out. The criminal defendant gets away with it and that's courtesy of this stupidity built into that law.
Well, and just to add to that, Vince, you're absolutely right. And the judges will label the police officers as liars, and so will the prosecutors, rendering them unable to testify in the future. And so now officers are very reluctant to be as descriptive as they want to be in these reports, because they're concerned that some frame of video that's paused 6 months later when they're in the trial may not match up exactly with what they wrote in the report, and they'll be lambasted by the court for that. And this is exactly right. I mean, listen, there's 26 subtitles in this. I certainly don't have time to get into them all, but I can assure you that every single one of them hamstrings police officers from being able to go out and do their job in a professional, responsible way. And until they repeal that law, there's no way that these numbers are going anywhere, either the staffing numbers or the crime numbers. We're going to continue to see these problems until they get rid of that bill.
What role does U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves, the U.S. Attorney for D.C., play in all of this?
Well, he plays a big part, because the cases that the officers are making, when the officers are going out and making arrests, or detectives are typing up warrants and getting people arrested on probable cause for these violent crimes, the vast majority of those cases are not being papered, is the term that we use, which means bring charges. When the officers bring the case into the U.S. Attorney's office, they're being dismissed. And the argument that's being given is, well, we only take cases that have prosecutorial merit. But that's completely sort of ignoring the idea that there's this grand jury process where most of the investigation gets done, and that happens after the arrest, when officers and detectives get subpoena power and bring in witnesses and show evidence and make a case in the grand jury and indict people. That's where we really strengthen our cases. What Mr. Graves is saying is that he's evaluating the case on that sort of initial probable cause document, and he's just no papering it, meaning that he's dismissing it outright. And until we start to see those no paper rates, as we call them, decrease and the charging rates go up, most criminals aren't going to be held accountable.
Do cops have a habit in D.C. of arresting people who aren't committing crimes? Is that what's happening?
Not that I'm aware of, because I'm pretty sure that all of these disciplinary and complaint and investigative systems and 9 other agencies that investigate police behavior would have a field day with that.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And it's the only thing you'd be reading about. It'd be on the cover of the Washington Post every day.
Yeah, yet Matthew Graves turned down prosecutions of 67% of all cases last year. Too much violent crime happening in the city, and a prosecutor nowhere to be found, unfortunately. Thank you very much, Gregg Pemberton. As always, good to talk to you. Really appreciate your insight today, sir.